Chapter 6. A New Worry. At Mr. Hinchcliffe's startling remark, Nancy blushed deeply, and Ned looked at the ground. They hastened to assure the councilman that they did not plan a wedding, and were not looking for an apartment. "Then why did you question me?" Mr. Hinchcliffe asked, annoyed. Nancy decided to be frank with the man. She said, "I'm tremendously interested in Mr. Thurston's zoo and aviary." Then, hoping to get a reaction from her listener and possibly learn some new facts, she added, "I'm glad the birds and animals aren't going to be taken away from here. It would be—" Mr. Hinchcliffe interrupted her. "But they are. No one would want an expensive apartment with a lot of smelly old bird and animal cages in their backyard." Nancy quickly assured the man that the development could be planned so that the tenants of the high-rise buildings would not be disturbed by the creatures on the farm. "Do you think you know better than the architects?" Mr. Hinchcliffe asked sarcastically. Ned spoke up. "I think that was an uncalled-for remark." Nancy went on. "This could be a very beautiful site with a cluster of high-rise apartment houses facing a man-made lake. There could also be a swimming pool, a park, and playground. On the other side of the lake would be Mr. Thurston's farm." "And it would be educational, too," Ned added. Suddenly, Mr. Hinchcliffe exclaimed, "Say, did that crazy holdout Thurston make you call me?" "No," Nancy answered quickly, "but I'd certainly hate to see this place destroyed. He has some fascinating birds. The children of Harper love to visit the zoo and aviary. Mr. Thurston spends a lot of time with them, explaining what the birds and animals are and in what parts of the world they live." Mr. Hinchcliffe started to walk toward his car. "All your pleading won't do any good. I've made up my mind to vote in favor of having the Thurston property condemned." Nancy and Ned concluded there was no use trying to convince the man. It was clear that he was sticking to his opinion and could not be persuaded to keep the farm as a lovely recreational park for the future tenants. Nancy changed the subject. "Mr. Hinchcliffe, yesterday when I was out here, there was an explosion. Was the high-rise construction company testing the ground for rocks, perhaps?" The councilman looked puzzled. "Explosion? What kind of explosion?" "A landmine." "Show me where it was," the man commanded. Nancy led the way to the spot. Mr. Hinchcliffe and Ned gazed in amazement at the hole in the earth. With a frown, the councilman said, "I'll find out from Mr. Wright about this." He walked off with a worried look on his face. After stepping into his car, he put it in gear and roared away. Ned grinned. "Friendly soul. Say, Nancy, you may have set up a little war in the council." Nancy laughed. "I hope it accomplishes some good," she said. "At least it may make the men suspicious of the high-rise people." Ned asked what else she had seen at the time of the explosion. She told him about Slick Fingers O'Malley. When she got to the part about looking through the pictures at police headquarters, he grinned and said, "You're really something, Nancy." "I made a drawing of a thin version of the stout parolee. Chief Pepper is sure he's the man we want, but so far none of us can figure out any motive for his planting a landmine here." Nancy added there was no proof of any connection between Slick Fingers and men in the high-rise company. Ned suggested that he and Nancy have lunch in Harper, then visit the Thurstons. She agreed, and they drove into town. About 2:00, they set off for the zoo and aviary. Nancy rang the front doorbell of the Thurston farmhouse. In a few moments, a voice inside said, "Who's there?" "It's Nancy Drew and a friend." "Then come in." Ned opened the door, and the couple crossed the hall. They found Mrs. Thurston in her wheelchair in the living room. Nancy introduced Ned, then asked how the woman was feeling. "I'm very nervous," Mrs. Thurston replied. Very upset indeed." "May I ask why?" Nancy questioned. Mrs. Thurston threw her arms up dramatically. More bad luck has fallen on us. We've been double jinxed. More trouble, Nancy exclaimed, incredulous. Can you tell us what happened? The woman began to twist a handkerchief nervously in her hands. Poor Oscar! Oh, why do these things happen to us? Nancy and Ned waited patiently for her to explain. Finally, she said, Nearly all the birds in one of the cages are ill. Oscar and Roush are busy treating them with antibiotics, but a few have already died. What's the matter with them? Ned asked. Is Petra all right? Nancy queried. She turned to Ned and said, That's the name of Cammie's wryneck. Mrs. Thurston ground her teeth. That girl! She's been getting free board here in return for helping Oscar. Now she walks off and takes Petra with her. Nancy felt that she must come to Cammie's defense. I suppose she was afraid Petra would become ill too. She not only loves that bird, Mrs. Thurston, but she considers it as her link to her native land. She declares it brings her good, not bad luck. Ned spoke up. If Cammie isn't here, then your husband is short-handed for helpers. Yes, he is. Of course, Roush works hard, but he mostly takes care of the animals while Oscar watches all the birds. Nancy and Ned looked at each other. Then she said, Let's go pitch in. They excused themselves and went out the kitchen door. Mr. Thurston was just coming to the house. Nancy introduced Ned. We came to help you, she said. That's very kind, he said. All the sick birds are in that last cage. Don't go in there. They probably have ornithosis and humans can catch it. I'll continue with my treatment. If you want to help, open the door of that shed over there and bring back pails of bird food. All the different bags are marked. Breeds of birds eat certain food that others don't. You'll see the feeding troughs. When you get through with that work, fill the large watering cans and pour the water into the various containers inside the cages. Nancy said to Oscar, It's too bad Cammie left you. Where did she go? Oscar explained that she had taken a room at the university until the birds were well again. The man heaved a great sigh. I believe Cammie is on the level, but my wife is suspicious of her. She thinks that Cammie and Petra together have jinxed us. Of course, I don't put any stock in such nonsense, but I can't talk Martha out of her beliefs. He went off to attend to his sick birds. Nancy and Ned hurried to get the feed. Then they unlocked and entered one cage after another. Ned remarked again and again how beautiful the birds were and tried to learn the names of some of the more exotic species from signs attached to the doors. Presently, the couple finished their work, but Oscar was still busy. Oscar didn't say anything about our cleaning the cages, but I think they need it, Ned remarked. Let's do what we can. Nancy agreed with the young man's suggestion. He got a long-handled scraper, and Nancy took an extra stiff broom. They worked for nearly half an hour. The sun was going down, and they decided to quit. This is a tough job, Ned remarked as they started for the main house. Much harder than selling insurance. Nancy laughed. And more strenuous than solving mysteries. Oscar joined them, and the three entered the kitchen together. Suddenly they became aware of moaning sounds coming from the living room. As they rushed forward, Oscar cried out, Martha must be in trouble! End of chapter 6.